Karen Piggott is a registered nurse who works in a hospital surgical unit in Colorado. As a young child, she started having recurring nightmarish dreams about a woman who had lived around the time of the American Civil War, who had died after being shot off of her horse. She also had other vivid dreams from that period in history. The following is Karen Piggott's account of her efforts to piece together her past life of a woman who had lived in the 19th century. Number 3. Childhood. The dream always started out the same way, where she was accompanying a man to a farmhouse. The next morning, they say goodbye, and he left through the back door and rode away. She watched him ride off, and then she rode back the way they had come the day before. After riding for a bit, she noticed that she was being followed by a man. She wondered why he was following her, and she expected him to catch up to explain what he was doing. He just kept following her. She stopped at a friend's house for a rest and then started back home. Although she could not see this man behind her, she felt his presence. She then made her way down a trail towards a river. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the man again, who was barely concealed behind a bush. She decided to ignore him and not take him seriously. But she should have. She suddenly saw that he had raised his shotgun, and as she rode closer to the bush, she heard a loud blast and felt searing pain strike her, and she fell to the ground and lay on the damp earth. She was now lying on her stomach and was trying to raise herself up with her arms, but was only able to lift herself up just a tiny bit. And as she did this, a second blast struck her, where she fell back to the ground. The strangest thing, though, was that the man who shot her had an uncanny resemblance to her Uncle Floyd in this life, but in the dream he looked like a native Indian. Remember that this vivid description was coming from a 5-year-old. At the time, Karen claimed to have had other strange dreams where she heard a voice telling her that she'd lived before and that she'd been a horse thief. In these dreams, she was shown an image of a young woman with dark hair and wearing a long skirt. The voice was always narrated by a male, as if she was being taught something. Karen soon became afraid to sleep in her room after having so many strange dreams. On certain nights, she would go out into the hallway after everyone was asleep and cry because she was afraid of sleeping in her bed. On the occasions that she was brave enough to sleep in her bed, she would put all the stuffed animals on top of her and hide, hoping no one would know she was there. She tried everything to hide from a nighttime guest. Number 2. Adolescence. Karen said that she had not grown up around horses, other than what she would see on farms while driving in the car. The dreams did not correspond to any event that she had seen on television or a movie. In 1970, when Karen was 12 years old, she was able to recall other parts of a dream where her body was being prepared for burial. She was placed in a coffin and people filed past to pay their respects. The Indians who were attending the funeral threw pieces of cornbread into the casket as they walked past her body. She did not like seeing this and thought it was dirty. In this dream, she was viewing the scene whilst out of her body. In 1972, when she was 14, she read a book called Bell's Star in Her Times by Glenn Shirley, and read that the reason the Cherokee people had thrown cornbread into Bell's casket was based on an old Cherokee custom. This appeared to validate her dreams. That same year, she started to become more and more interested in reincarnation, where she would get out books on past lives. One day, she came up with an idea that she should visit the library and get out books on women in the Wild West, where she started to read about women outlaws in an attempt to further identify this dream, which she now believes was of a past life. She figured that researching it should not be too hard, as there would not have been too many women in that area who had been shot off a horse. She then read about famous women from that era, such as Calamity Jane, Cattle Kate, Big Nose Kate, Belle Boyd, Little Britches, Cattle Annie, and that name, Belle Starr, appeared again. Number 1. Belle Starr. Karen remembers a dream when she was 13 years old and had accompanied her father in a wagon to retrieve the body of her brother. She knew it was her brother they were collecting because she remembered the emotion of the dream and the anxiety from her parents. She noticed the way both parents reacted and how she felt. She said that she recognised the man as her father, as she had the same relationship as they did in this life. Their wagon did not have a cover over it and had a buckboard on the front. She went into the house with her father to where her brother's body was kept. They brought out his belongings first, which included his gun, and Belle sat in the wagon whilst her father went back inside to retrieve her brother's body. There were Union troops milling around, saying unpleasant things about her brother, and some of the comments were directed towards her. She picked up her brother's gun and pointed it at the troops, but they just laughed at her. During the ride back home, her father was very angry about the incident. He said that she should have kept her cool and should not have brought any attention to herself and the family. Karen found another book about Belle Starr called Belle Starr the Bandit Queen by Burton Rasco. On reading the book, she came across a chapter about Belle Starr's death and the events leading up to it. Everything she had dreamed about as a child of being shot off a horse was written in this book. When she read how Belle Starr had died, she was almost hysterical. Karen then read how Belle Starr lived during the Civil War conflict, when the Union Army had defeated the Confederates, and when some Confederate supporters rebelled against Northern sanctions and domination, and they took to a life of crime. Belle Starr and her supporters became outlaws. Belle became involved with Jess James and Frank James and the younger brothers. From the book, she now understood the dreams that she had had since she was 5 years old. She realised that the person who shot her was called Jim July Starr, who in her dream had resembled her Uncle Floyd in her current lifetime, and was shocked to think that the man in this dream could actually be her Uncle Floyd. But she could not ignore the similarities, not only of the face, but the way he stood and the mannerisms and speech were the same. Jim was a Cherokee Indian, and she had married him so that she could live in the Indian Territories, away from Missouri and the Union law. On what she'd read, she could now recreate the details of a recurring dream and what had actually happened in that previous life that had haunted her since she was 5 years old. Jim July and Belle Starr were visiting a friend's house, and after they left, she headed back to their home in the Indian Territories, while Jim claimed that he had to go to Fort Smith to face charges of theft. In the dream, while she was riding home, she soon sensed that someone was following her. She now realised it was Jim. That was strange, she thought. Maybe he changed his mind about going to Fort Smith. He never caught up with her, but instead stayed back a comfortable distance. Belle stopped by another neighbour to chat along the way back, and she thinks this is when Jim went ahead of her. She left the neighbour's home and continued on her way. She had almost made it to the river's edge when she was shot.